Coming down the driveway, and only just come back from the shop, and look who's on the driveway. Yes, that is exactly what you think it is.
This is the sort of stuff you experience living out in the country off-grid.
Honestly, this animal, the average Australian, will never ever sort of see outside of a nature park.
If you're not obsessed with being connected all the time, it's nice to be surrounded by a whole stack of nature, you know. Yeah, this sort of life's a great life.
One of the main reasons for living off the grid here is because in the early 90s the power system here was privatised. Once the system was privatised, it was pointless. You had to pay out of your own pocket for it, and the costs were phenomenal. Quite simply, it's going to cost me over $43,000 to get the power connected here, and then I'm going to have to pay a power bill. And I know for about $25,000 I could get a solar and wind system that would move heaven and earth. Why would you bother being on the grid? This is my main house system. These panels here are 120 watts each, and I've put two of them together on a wooden frame, powered up with star pickets. I consider solar panels borderline magical. To put one in place, it's about as complicated as hanging a picture. That is a 30 amp charge controller, which is quite a good one. And one battery, and there's another battery inside there. There's leads that run from these batteries into an inverter inside the house, which gives me mains power. I have never once ran the batteries flat in almost 2 years of living here, and more than a year and a half of the system being installed. And as for the fridge, it's 120 watt solar panel running off 100 amp hours worth of batteries.
There's this myth going around that you can't go off the grid cheap, that you need to put in $15,000 or more worth of solar panels to be able to live off the grid. I can tell you for a fact it is cheap to set up off-grid.
First of all, we come into the kitchen. It's a lot easier living off-grid than what people think it's like. It's my propane stove, which is essentially a camping stove with a little vent above it. And the wood stove. Initially you sort of realise you're entering an energy crisis. It's not an energy crisis full stop, it's more an electrical energy crisis, because when you've had the grid on, there's so many things, you know, you think electric hot water system, air conditioning, heating, stoves, you name it. It's either wired into your power board or you've got a plug on the end and you just whack it in the power point. So initially you think, well, gee, you know, I'm going into a place where energy is a scarce commodity. And it sort of is. So some appliances you can't run, but you can run a lot of other things. This is the solar-powered fridge I've got. Essentially it's a high-end car fridge. Uses standard vapour compression technology with quite a different sort of compressor in it. Oh, there we go, she's starting up. And that allows me to have cold food. It's actually about 32 litres, so it reckons in fridge terms. And sometimes I buy too much, but I always work out that if I sort of rearrange, I can get everything to fit. And there hasn't been times where I've really run out of room, although there's some things I know that don't really need refrigeration, so I just leave them out in favour of things that do. Cold food from a solar system. And out there, past the cobwebs, is a solar panel. It has 100 amp hours worth of batteries. It basically will run the fridge compressor for 20 hours straight. Most days, the solar panel, by about 10:30 in the morning, sometimes it almost takes barely a thing. The fridge is the only thing on this circuit, so that it's unaffected by any other usage. Basically I just mount a solar panel, usually on star pickets, but I've got angle here for the box, and in that box will be a charge controller, and a battery, and heavy red cables that go off to the fridge. When it comes to solar systems, I've got mains power from that, but I can't whack on something with a heavy load. There's certain devices I can't run. This is the freezer. So some appliances you can't run, but you can run a lot of other things. That's your switching. It's a three-way job: AC, gas, DC, and flame indicator. And that means she's going because it's in the green and she's lit. Okay. There's a massive amount of systems out there which aren't exactly the same as on-grid systems. In a way they're the same, but they're a different beast. Okay, so it's about 9:44 and I turned this on yesterday at 5 PM. House is building up like I suspected. This is to hold all the coils in. And what do you know, look at this. Look, she's full crystallised and everything. And you may never have picked up on a lot of this stuff unless you've been forced to look for it. This is my bathroom. It's a sink there. I do my dishes in it and wash my hands and whatnot. Here's the shower. Yes, very shonky, hillbilly style. That's a camping hot water system. It's an American brand known as Coleman. That feeds out of what was a document tub, which is on top of a stand, and it's bedded into sand and cement. It is filled with a tap that runs from the overhead tank, and when it's full it overflows into a bucket. You will also note there is an actual decent sized battery there. This is switches and plugs. Behind there, that's zip ties that hold onto a mains charger, which is plugged into that cable, which continues right down to that one there. All these things that you sort of thought you couldn't have, you realise you can have, but just they're not quite the same device that you had before. I go down like that, and that charges it, and then it sits in the middle, and then I go up, and then I can turn it on. Hey, electronic ignition, no piezo. I must admit these are quite smartly designed. When you have them open, you'll see how many scalding sensors overheating. They're loaded with sensors inside. They also have entirely coated the circuitry in epoxy. A lot of these things you've got, and while they aren't inch for inch identical to the on-grid way, they just use a different technology, or they're sort of pretty similar but not quite exactly the same. Like when I turn the tap on, it doesn't just sort of go straight up. It sort of takes a second and then woof, then the water starts coming. And then as I go to turn it off, it seems I've got an immense amount of pressure as I'm cutting it off. Your life doesn't completely go down the drain, but there's some things that may get a bit of a pull-up. This here is the main water tank that I use. It's 22,500 litres, which isn't terribly big in Australian terms, and above it is the overhead tank. Now this overhead tank supplies the pressure to the house and the laundry that I need. It's not massive pressure, but it definitely does do the job. Thought my tank may be getting a bit low, and I've found I'm right. Hear the echo? It'll echo where there's no water, and then where there is water it won't. At the moment this is purely fed by tanker truck. The truck just turns up with a great big load of water and just pumps it in. Essentially every week there is a washing day, and as I'm running the generator for the washing machines, I also run the pump, which feeds out of this tank into the overhead tank. Here, doing a bit of washing. These are twin tub machines. You have an agitator and whatnot in that side, which stirs everything up. And this side has been drier. If you're a city dweller, you may not have even seen these machines. They're designed to, well, basically be used without mains pressurised water, because you fill it directly with a 1-inch hose. They have a very short cycle time to clean stuff. I usually go about 10 minutes to wash initially, and then I wring it out for about a minute, and then I rinse for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then I wring it out again, and it goes on the clothesline. I make the most of having a generator running while I'm doing this by having 1, 2, 3 machines running at once, and I pump up the water I need to pump up to the overhead tank. And of course I'm using a lot of water while I'm washing, so I not only refill the tank from the week's use and refill it for next week, but I'm also refilling it as I'm using it for the washing machines, because the washing machines, without a doubt, they take the most consumption of water of anything in the house. Now for washing machines, when I do my washing, of course I'm going to use a lot of water, and I have a little switch in there that I turn on, and it refills that tank, and I've got the generator running when I've got to do the washing, so I might as well have an electrical water pump. I could have one otherwise, but it just seems that I'm topping up the water at the same time I'm doing the washing. I might as well whack a few other appliances on if I'm running a washing machine, so I do that. Yes, there's some things that may be a pain in the butt. There's a lot of ways and means that you essentially end up achieving a lot of the same stuff that you had on grid originally anyway. What do you do for drying clothes? The person who lives in New York City may ask. Well, we have these racks, and this is in a nice, bright, sunny veranda, which I've enclosed with some old windows and actually even a glass door down the bottom. And we call these racks clothes horses. The other stunt I use is to have some fencing wire. The other one I use is this. There's aluminium rails around my wood heater. Now this was one of the best moves I ever made, was to put a wood heater in my bedroom. This was an evaporative air conditioner. The idea here was to draw the air in through the big box from the door. There's a vent in the door, and that blows that across to the vent over there behind my inverter, which is a 12-volt to mains box. Many off-gridders, me included, seem to like the idea of having backup systems or extra systems. We won't just have one option. This is my backup shower. I have a 10-watt solar panel through the cement sheet there, which goes to this little charge controller. I can't remember if it's 6 amp or 8 amp, but either way it's overkill for what it is. Runs down to this battery, which, yes, I know is just basically ready for scrap metal. I have 2 water pumps, both 12 volt. Now these cost you about 20-25 bucks each, and they come with a cigarette lighter end and a very waterproof switch and decent heavy cable. I can pour water straight in this tub, and by hitting this button here, this one here will pump away up to what was a clean garbage can and a 3-ring propane burner, heating that up. And then we have a second one of these shower shenanigans hanging off a string. That string goes through that hole to hold it about here somewhere. And when the time comes, I hit this switch right beside my shower base, and it pumps out the hot water. I think a lot of people always want something that'll work under any conditions and work 100% of the time, and they get this with being on the grid. This whole idea of using the grid for complete reliability, well, you're looking at someone who experienced it going off 56 times in 1 year. And if that's the grid, I don't believe the grid's terribly reliable because it hasn't been for me. As you can see here, this is a tiny little rainwater catchment system. This is basically a dual peak roof, and it's a valley gutter. It skews to this little tiny tank. One of the big things that I'm into is not so much environmental sustainability but more economic sustainability. There's actually quite a bit of pressure in this one. 80% of my income is disposable. My biggest bill would probably be my internet bill, followed by my water cartage bill, which eventually will be non-existent if I get a decent rainwater catchment system. That's where it hooks up and goes in. That's actually almost full from that valley gutter back there. This used to be my uncle's house, and he was a hoarder. What you see right there is part of the kitchen. There's the kitchen table. This was his bed. There's a bed post there. Oh, this is the other end of his bed. That's the pillow there, his bed head. He was so messy that he had boxes and stools and stuff that were sitting on his bed, so he had enough room to stand there and get dressed with his big pile of clothes here. And at night he had to get all that stuff, chuck it off the bed and get into bed. When he got out of bed in the morning he had to throw all that up so he had enough room to walk around and get dressed. As a 16-year-old, I saw my uncle repossessed for a massive amount of property, and my attitude towards money has never been the same since. And if you look around the bedroom, there seems to be a surprisingly large amount of plywood, and the reason behind that is my uncle got hold of a whole heap of plywood and it was still here, and to cover most of the house with plywood was a bit of a better option than buying a whole heap of new plasterboard. I would rather have a lower quality of life or a lower standard of living and not have a great heap of debt. Oh, here we are with the peas. Now these are native. These have just come up from the big bumper crop last year, dropped a lot of seeds, and those seeds have come up, and that's what we've got here.
I believe that between Mother Nature or God, whatever you want to call it, or whoever provided the world, the natural world around us, and the technology available, almost everything's provided. You know, you got foraging. Can you see there honeycomb? Yes.
This is the stump of a, well, actually a peppercorn tree. That is all stinging nettle. A whole lot of that is an edible weed. And I have eaten it. First time I ate it, it tasted like asparagus. This here is wild radish. If you rip these green leaves off right now, stick them in your mouth as is and start chewing them, they taste exactly like a radish that you've pulled out of the ground. Exactly. We've got a lot of almond trees around here that were planted years ago by relatives. And
you've got all this stuff to be able to grow things and live a reasonable life instead of almost be completely independent from the outside world.
This is your run-of-the-mill rabbit.
Now what seems to happen that I notice around here, we've got rabbits here, and they are native, they're bought from England, and now they're just a national pest of chronic proportions.
Gee, he's pretty healthy.
I can catch rabbits on foot. I can get a rabbit, I can chase it down and catch it with my bare hands and butcher them later. And you can live as they did in the old times to be more and more self-sufficient and be more and more able to exist independent of the system.
There's a bit of old school water heating equipment. This is known as a copper. Uses some sort of propane burner underneath, and it heats up around the actual copper centre. This is another one here that's a very old system. They call them chip heaters. Some of you may think that when we're off-grid it isn't much different from just how they used to live in the olden days, or how my great-grandparents used to live. These were wood chip, and at a later date apparently they also went to some form of gas.
And it's doable, but times have changed. We have the massive advancement called solar panels.
This is a monocrystalline panel. This is amorphous. These are designed to last 20 to 25 years and have the smallest size per wattage output. These amorphous ones will run quite alright under lower light levels. They are 2 to 3 times the size. They are like about half the price as well, but I can only get a 2-year warranty on them, and a lot of people say you only get about 5 years realistic use out of them.
We also have one that many people don't realise how big an advancement it is.
These switches here are for what I use in the winter. LED lights.
These are very, very efficient, which means all of a sudden you've got plenty more power left in your solar panels. And the other one that's a real big one, I reckon, it's very easy to come by nowadays, with propane or LPG. You've got to realise that people existed before the grid. Around here the grid only went on in the mid-50s. And basically the way I see off-grid living is living as they did around here before the power come on. And then as you can afford it, as you have the money for it, you step forward in technology. But quite simply, it's so easy to obtain solar power. It's almost magical just to have a panel, much like a picture frame, that's just pointing at the sun, and that's all you need, along with 2 boxes and a battery, and you got mains power. It's still hard to believe sometimes.